Well, here we are on June 28th in Denver, Colorado, and we're going to do the life of John Auxier this afternoon. John, just so nobody gets caught, I'm Art Lucas, and well, they'd probably recognize me anyway, wouldn't they? John, I only met you when we were both adults, so I have no idea where you came from. I would have assumed it was Tennessee. Can you begin by telling us where you started your life?
Well, you're close. I was born in eastern Kentucky, up in the coal mining country, which is one of the reasons a person has said I'm pro-nuclear.
Oh yeah.
If you grow up in the coal mining fields, any other form of energy looks good. But my folks, Art, I've decided over the decades that there's two or three things that you look at in life. Your life is steered and governed by a few major events,
yep.
But most of the steering is done by little things, little nudges along the way.
Yeah.
And so the first biggie, of course, is your genes, what you get from your parents, and your early rearing. And my folks were hardworking people. The most education they could get was the 8th grade, but they believed mightily in education, so that they wanted all their kids to get the most education they could stand. And we had a strong work ethic, and you were taught from the very beginning that your character was the most important thing. Yep. Well, up through the 30s, I was taught that I was going to go to school, however, but I had this burning desire for aviation. When I was a little child, once every month you'd hear an airplane go over, and I was wild about that. In my genetic makeup was the need for aviation, and my heroes and heroine of the days were like Lindbergh and Wiley Post and Amelia Earhart, people this was. And I had this burning desire to fly. But I also knew there was very little chance that I would ever get to do that. And then World War II came along.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there was a potential opportunity. But I was just young enough that I could only go into the service in 1944. I had very great teachers. We talked earlier about teachers.
Yeah.
A little high school in Paintsville, Kentucky, and I passed the 2-year college equivalency between in the middle of my senior year, and off I went to aviation cadets. But I was 2 years younger than the people like Yeager and Bob Hoover and them that got combat. I got my wings and bars the very week that MacArthur oversaw the peace settlement in Tokyo Bay.
I'll be darned.
Well, I was still going to make the Air Force, or Army Air Corps it was at that time, still make it my career, but after a couple of years and a year up in Alaska flying really slow airplanes,
yes,
I decided that Yeager and Hoover and these people were going to get all the good jobs, deservedly so. They were combat aces and great flyers and a lot of time. So I decided that the best thing for me was to get out of service and get an education, and then I might come back or not, depending.
Yeah.
There's another big step, getting out of the service to go to college. But before I left, I knew I was going to go back to Kentucky, go to Berea College, and major in physics. And I did. And after I graduated from college, or in the process, another nudge came my way. Yeah. A great teacher, head of the physics department, said, "John, I think you ought to apply for this AEC fellowship." And I said, "What is?" He said, "Radiological physics." I said, "What's that?" He says, "I don't know." But he says, "It's too good an offer to pass up." And I said, "But I don't want to go to Vanderbilt. I've got a scholarship at Indiana University in optics." He said, "This sounds a lot better." And people today would not believe what a thing it was at the time, but he got on the long distance telephone. Now this is where you have to go through operators and all this stuff, and called Francis Slack, who was head of the physics department at Vanderbilt. He said, "Francis," he said, "what is this radiological physics fellowship, and what kind of a degree is it?" Slack says, "Well, it's a degree in straight physics. It's just as if they came here without a scholarship, except they have to take 2 more courses that's stipulated by the AEC. You have to take comparative anatomy and physiology and you have to take a course called health physics or radiological physics, and I don't know what it is, but it's just added on so it doesn't subtract from the quality of our degree.
Yep.
And so Dr. Knoll made me apply for it, and lo and behold, I got it. And that was the nudge that got me out of one field into health physics, because by the time I finished that course and got my master's degree at Vanderbilt, I was caught up in all the unsolved problems in health physics.
Yeah.
People today can't believe how many there were then, but you were doing dosimetry and instrument development, and that's what I ended up doing too. But after I finished the fellowship, I went to the University of Texas at Austin to the Balcones Research Center, Radiobiological Research Laboratory, to work on a contract for the Air Force on the ANP. And most people have forgotten that.
I know about ANP.
The Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Project.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. It was great. We were doing radiobiological studies on everything from mice to chimpanzees.
Yeah.
And but due to happenstance, I became head of the physics, engineering, and health physics departments, all in the thing. So I designed the radiation facilities, did the dosimetry, and participated in building the equipment to test the animals. And we did some sophisticated tests of chimpanzees. We taught them to fly an airplane.
Now this was so that if you flew ANP, that you'd know the effect on people?
That's right. Several facets. One is the lower levels, how much damage we've done to flight crews routinely. Mm-hmm. The other was, if you're in a super bomber and going toward Russia or someplace, and they shot a weapon at you that was a nuclear warhead, and you got huge doses, question one is, are you dead right then? Is the mission shot or not? Or can you go on and deliver your payload before you crash?
Yeah.
Or third, can you go on, deliver your payload, and come home and land this multi-million-dollar airplane?
Yeah.
And that were the questions we were out to answer. But the thing was that even at my tender age then, I could do the arithmetic, and I could see that we were never going to be able to use a nuclear power, a nuclear reactor to get an airplane off the ground.
Yeah.
In the meantime, the Oak Ridge folks, where I'd done my summer residency, wanted me to come back, work for KZ Morgan, Sam Hurst, and these people. And so at the beginning of 1955, I went back to Oak Ridge, and then I started doing regular dosimetry research and some of the things that you're aware of. But the big thing was to get involved in the dosimetry for the survivors of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Sam Hurst was the leader on the effort, and I was one of several team members. But in 1957, Sam's mind was wandering to more exotic things, and I ended up leading the effort and wrote the report on the dosimetry for Japan. The beauty of that was we got to do about anything we wanted to do research-wise. Went to Japan and helped outline the kinds of information to be gathered there, participated in the weapons tests.
Yep.
I think I participated in 57 weapons tests, and some of the ones you were on.
That's a bunch, yes.
Yeah, and on early recovery. And all the people that could match me on going into ground zero shortly after the bombing are all dead now. And not because of radiation, they were just older than I was.
They were just old.
But we had a lot of fun, excitement there. And that went on through the 50s, except in 1958. That became the most famous year in our history for nuclear accidents. In July, we had an accident. Nobody died, but a lot of people got seriously exposed at the Y-12 plant in Oak Ridge.
Oh, yes.
In the fall, I think is October, in Vinca, Yugoslavia, the SL-1, or the zero power reactor. Yep. They actually killed a person and exposed several others. And in the same year, the last day of the year at Los Alamos was the second or the third of the Los Alamos criticality experiments, and where a person died. And then it wasn't too long after that, there was the one at Wood River Junction up in Rhode Island. During this period, all of a sudden, everybody's really worried about nuclear accidents and the measurement of doses to people.
Yes.
So I started a program, and we, Sam Hurst and Rufus Ritchie led the effort on the one for Y-12, the first one. And then I took over from there, and we did dozens of experiments. And then we all went to, in 1960, in IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, made arrangements with the Yugoslavs, with Tito's government, for the international team to come in and recreate the accident. That is, under controlled conditions, do what the reactor had done under uncontrolled conditions. And that was a fantastic team. Had a French team that actually ran the modified, made the reactor safe and operated it. Our team did the radiation dosimetry, had some help from the British, and a few scattered other helpers.
Now all this is pretty tough dosimetry because it's mixed field dosimetry.
That's it.
And neutrons and gamma rays and
yeah,
not easy to do.
At that stage, that was my main consideration, was mixed coexistent neutron gamma fields. Mm-hmm. Working both ways, where the neutrons were the bigger part of it, and the gamma was little, and that made the gamma hard to measure. And the other one, when you had a lot of gamma and little neutrons, and that was hard to measure.
Yes.
The single ion detector and several of the dosimeters that we did. But I want to show you a picture because you won't remember when I looked this young.
Oh, yeah.
But this was been about the late 50s when we were working on that won't stand up like some of them.
It looks a lot like Elvis Presley, doesn't it?
No.
No? Let me hold that up there.
Now, well, this one will stand up, I think.
Okay.
And this shows TV Blosser and I in the crude forerunner of an assembly to study the collimation effect, to collimate neutrons and gamma rays in the desert, where we made 120 of these big tanks, and some of them had lead inserts and some didn't, to measure the radiation coming from a nuclear weapon
from a direction
as a function of angle. If it's in that direction, and then we looked in all other directions to see how much the radiation came in from those angles.
Yeah.
Crucial fundamental data in those days, and we learned a lot. The main part of our effort, though, where we delivered our message to people, was at meetings.
Yes.
Well, first of all, here's a picture to show life in the desert wasn't all hard. We had frequent barbecues and beer parties and things, and this is Bob Corsby with not too much hair, yeah. And on this side is Johnny Williamson. These people were instrumental in all the field work in those days.
This has to be out at Mercury, is that?
That's at Mercury.
That's Mercury.
Yeah, and this is the same party, the same guys, but see, I was a little younger than they were then.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, but I started to say a minute ago, we delivered an awful lot of our findings, not only in the published literature, but at international meetings. Now, here's an international symposium on neutrons and radiobiology, and I won't go through all the people, but some of them, Norm Frigerio, remember? He was a key player. And Bob Wood over here, who headed effort at Division of Biology and Medicine in the old days, and then later in the DOE Health and Safety area. But we ended up transferring our knowledge between groups at international meetings. And that was one of many. I did mention one thing. I mentioned Yugoslavia. Yes. That was a big effort. And you see Yugoslavs, French, British, Norwegians, all of us there. And Dixon Callahan and Rufus Ritchie are over here on this end. And if you go across, hidden in there, barely showing, is Fred Sanders, and then I, and there's a whole bunch of us from Oak Ridge there. And that was a great experiment.
Where was this in Yugoslavia?
At Vincha, just outside Belgrade.
Okay, I know where Vincha is. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and fantastic stories there. You see, Yugoslavia was a communist country, and Tito was affiliated with the Soviet Union, but they also had a lot not in common. And the Russians didn't want the Yugoslavs to have too much nuclear capability. So a scientist named Popovich, he kept going back and forth to Russia, and he was smuggling things back in that built the zero power reactor.
I see.
And that would be fun to go to. Anyway,
now, didn't you folk publish some books at that time?
Yes.
In the native language, so that these people could read them?
Well, actually, we wrote them in English, and then the IAEA translated them and into several languages, as the IAEA usually does. And as people who watch this now will know I have a tendency when I get wrapped up in these things to talk too fast.
Well, that's okay.
I was a dread person as far as the IAEA translation people, interpreters concerned. They were always waving flags at me from the booth, slow down, so that sort of thing. And with my accent and drawl, whatever, it was hard on them.
Well, let me tell you something about that. Many years later, when I visited Yugoslavia, they gave me a present because, you know, I was being honored in every way. They gave me, as a present, a complete set of those books.
Oh, good.
And they are in my library to this day.
That's the collaborative effort that went into that, and the teamwork between British, French, and us was marvelous. We became good friends. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, one of the Yugoslavs came to this country later, and is up in Ohio now. His name escapes me, and I won't waste time thinking about it. But very good man. He's innovative like you. Designed remote dosimetry systems to put in houses so that if a bomb went off, a nuclear weapon, this is many years ago, then it would automatically telemeter data to where you wanted it to go. Now, I've gone fast through a lot of these areas, but that area is research.
Yes.
I mean, I was doing practical research in dosimetry, but by about 1962, weapons tests above ground were done, essentially. And that's when we designed and built the Bren Tower, and later the Henry Tower.
Yes.
This is a 1,527-foot high tower, television tower. We designed a raceway for the side of it to carry the reactor on, the Health Physics Research Reactor. Later, the accelerator you mentioned before.
I'm told this was the tallest radio tower in the world at that time. Is that right?
No, there was one at Cape Girardeau, Missouri, was a little higher.
I see.
Yeah.
It was a pretty tall tower.
It was a pretty tall tower. And it's a fun toy to play with. But at that time, after we got the reactor out of there and took it back to its home, its permanent home, we built a facility called the DOSAR facility at Oak Ridge. And my status changed from a researcher or group leader to a section head. And we had, like counting our graduate students, about 32 people. And we were publishing of the order of 40 or 50 papers a year.
I remember that time, yes,
yeah.
Yes.
And, but during the period of the 60s then until 1971, I led that effort, and it was an international effort. We had people, that's when we first brought over Klaus
Becker, yes, I remember visiting Klaus there in that lab.
And yep. all those people.
Yep.
And but by 1971, we were within a year of Carl Morgan's retirement.
Yeah.
Carl was convinced that the lab would make an exception and keep him on after 65. Mm-hmm. There was no way that he had been crosswise with management from a long time back, and I knew that he wasn't going to be. But leave out the steps in between, but the lab director, Dr. Alvin Weinberg, called me in one day and he said, your operation seems to be running well. Why don't you just take off and go somewhere and come back with a PhD? Because I didn't have it at that time.
Good idea.
So the way this worked is they kept me on salary, but I had to pay my school expenses. Yep. That's a good deal.
That's a good deal,
So
John.
I went back to my office and I got on the phone, and you mentioned MIT before. Yep. I talked to the folks at MIT and worked my way southeastward around through University of Pittsburgh, North Carolina, Duke, Georgia Tech, Florida, Vanderbilt, and Texas A&M. Talking to everybody said, gee, John, we'd like to have you come. And I said, well, I got a catch in it. I have a particular mission. I want to learn the things I'm going to need to know to run the Health Physics Division. And I need radiation chemistry, nuclear chemistry, the things I've not had before, aerosol physics and all these. Yep. I said, I need to get those. Can I come and get that curriculum and get a degree? Well, the guys I were talking to were, Dade Moeller types, and they couldn't commit. But when I talked to Lyle Roberts down at Georgia Tech, he says, sure, come on down. That was on a Thursday afternoon. Friday morning, I was in his office when he came in, and we worked out a curriculum.
Yeah.
And the following, that weekend, my wife and I set me up a little apartment close to the campus, and Monday I matriculated into Georgia Tech for the spring quarter, and I went through the summer and the next 2 quarters, 1 full calendar year exactly, and finished all the course requirements, including French, which I had decided I'd take instead of German this time.
I see.
And went back to the laboratory and finished the thesis over the next several months, and got the degree that fall. But I also then took over the division the 1st of July.
What was your thesis, John?
Let me see, get the exact title. The terrestrial radiation environment contribution to human dose, or something like that.
Okay, I got it.
You were talking about things that you had done first. One of the things that I did first, as far as I know, maybe not, was to use jelly detectors to measure radiation environment, get the gamma spectrum, and do the calculations, the theory about what the spectrum should look like from sources distributed in the soil. We looked in coal mines, went to Florida, went through the phosphogypsum area, looked at the roads down there, looked around at the granite roads around Stone Mountain, Georgia, and up in New Hampshire and those places.
Yes.
Yeah, we had a van fixed up for it, and Phil Perdue would go and get up there and get everything set up, and I would fly in, and we'd make the measurements, and I'd fly back, and he'd drive back. I had a much better deal than he did.
I reckon so.
But
that's exciting stuff to this day.
Yeah, well, we had fun. That later led to stuff that then when I became division director, passed to other people. But the original stuff at Grand Junction, the uranium tailing stuff, and then that's the UMTRA, and then the FUSREP program, the formerly utilized stuff from World War II era, mostly in the Northeast, but St. Louis getting its share too.
Yep.
So, but the Fred Haywood and Bill Shinpaw and Purdue and all these people went off and did that.
Yep.
So then I became the director of the division, and I stayed until I retired at the end of 1982. The reason I retired, I mean, I had always thought I had the best job in the world.
Yes.
But we got a new lab director back there after Dr. Weinberg, and I was still middle-aged. I wasn't getting old, but I was had certain intolerances. And one of them that I have that's gotten stronger over the years is micromanagement. I've decided over the years that the things that'll kill business, laboratories, colleges, or anything, number one is apathy, and number two is micromanagement. Either will kill any kind of an organization. So I decided at the end of 1982, I had sufficient retirement points, and I retired and started again with the Applied Science Laboratory, and then later that was bought by IT Corporation, and it got into my...
These are businesses which you started on your own.
Well, the first one I started with participation of Gulf Nuclear.
Yes, okay.
But IT bought them out, and so I agreed to go on a year-by-year basis with IT. But after a few years, the micromanagement over there got so bad I couldn't stand that again, so I quit and said, I'm going to start a company. I'll name it after myself. Nobody will want to buy it, and that's the way it is. So I started Auxier and Associates in early in 1992. So, and we've been having fun ever since.
Now, John, I have to remind you that in between those two companies, you threw a party that is a party of the century, a party that everybody attended. We drove all the way from Cleveland, Ohio to Knoxville to come to your party. Remember this?
Yeah.
It was a great party.
Gene and I called that a celebration.
Well, it was.
We had all of our friends that could make it there, including from far away like you. Speaking of that, well, one other thing about the group I have now, everybody's been handpicked over the years, and there's John Fraser and Joe Alvarez, who was supposed to have been here now, Howard Pritchard, and on and on. We have a total of about 21 people that each is a remarkable team person, but capable on their own of doing almost anything in health physics.
Yes.
Almost anything. They all make me look bad when it comes to computer technology.
Yes.
They're always having to teach me something that they taught me last month, you know. Anyway, but talking about all these this work stuff. I don't to have people believe that I didn't have some other interests in life. Well, here's one that's work related. You know, I mentioned the Hiroshima and Nagasaki work.
Yes.
Well, one of the big egos on the planet was a man named Dr. Thomas Noguchi. Very famous on the West Coast. You would have known of him out there. He was the coroner of Los Angeles County. And he got interested in the Japanese who had been exposed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and had come to this country and got missed in the studies, missed out on the studies in Japan. So he called on me, and I brought up some of our folks, and we came out to help him set up the screening program, which we did finally get put in place. Wasn't a big deal. But in this particular picture shows one of the people that worked for me, George Kerr, you've known at the time.
Yes, I know George.
Bill Yamada, who is from Hiroshima, Dr. Noguchi, my wife, and I. The reason I wanted to mention that is I've known, and you have, a lot of fantastic characters in our day. But here is a gentleman who has 15 pathologists working for him. He only does the high visibility cases like the Sharon Tate murder case and that sort of stuff. But he doesn't carry keys. He doesn't carry a wallet. He didn't at that time anyway. He'd snap his fingers and people would appear, and he had a guy that drove him everywhere he went. He took us to Little Tokyo for the best Japanese meal I've ever had. And but they bowed and scraped when he came in. It's a real nice place. And well, I'll leave out some of the details, but he just took a liking to us, whereas all the other scientists in the crew, he had a press conference to announce all this stuff with scientists from UCLA and as far away as Berkeley and all these places. They were infuriated at him because he was directing a show and telling what it was like.
Yes. And
he was turning on the TV cameras, and he was orchestrating a big press conference for himself. And it amused the dickens out of me and Gene. Mm-hmm. And so when everybody else left and we were leaving, his secretary came and got us and said, wait, he'd like to take you to lunch. And we became good friends. We visited him several times out there, but he's been deposed in recent years. But he was a fantastic person to get acquainted with. I have another picture here of a group. I just wanted to mention this to make sure that I don't leave out Elda Anderson. She's not here,
yes.
Of course.
Oh, yes.
But Dr. Anderson that you mentioned was a mentor of mine. She used to put me up on the podium, and by the hour, she and Jake Neufeld would beat on me to try to improve my ability to make public speeches. And but I mentioned this picture because this is the only thing I had handy out here that reminded me of that. And these each year, we have this year it was on Tuesday morning. We had a Elda E. Anderson Award winners breakfast, and all of us here at one time or other won the Elda Anderson Award. Now, Bill Mills right here, and I'm the oldest of the bunch. I won it in 1962, and Bill a few years later, and we were both students of hers. But so this includes some very much younger people, and they're not all in this picture, but we had, I think it was 30 people Tuesday morning for breakfast to honor her and to swap lies and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah, here at the hotel.
She was truly a remarkable woman, and her life story is another story in itself.
Yeah, and it's never been adequately told because too few people know enough about her.
Yeah, well.
To show you that I didn't always have nothing but work, when my girls were growing up, we raised quarter horses and showed them and raced them and all that. And I did do some riding in those days, and my daughters still do. They're married. They're both in Athens, Georgia, and they're showing horses as a hobby yet. And one other thing, you know, I mentioned way back at the beginning,
yes.
I had this insatiable appetite for aviation. Well, I still keep that going, and here's my favorite recent toy. I've had this toy about 3 years now. This is a Cessna 421C Golden Eagle. Mm-hmm. Pressurized, fast, and with the little dog we got, we just take her everywhere and go nowhere where we don't take her. That's almost true. We had to go out to Honolulu last year, and so we got a woman to come and sit with her in our house in Tucson. It's amazing what a little old hunk of protoplasm this big can do to people's lives. And I've always liked animals, but she's a very special person, a special animal. Now, your list, if you've got any other questions on your list?
John, the part that I knew the most about in your life, that maybe we've given short shrift to, is that part out in the desert, because it was really a curious time trying to reincarnate the Japanese weapons, so forth. Now, we mentioned the Bren Tower, but then we went on to do some other things there. Now, tell me the difference between the Bren operation and the Henry operation.
Well, backing up a little bit, the weapons tests with real bombs, we had a variety of them, and we learned a lot, but we kept learning new things. And a couple of your collaborators were involved with us. You mentioned Henry Borella.
Yeah.
Henry and Sandy Sigaloff were out there. Yeah. And got some kind of screwy data from Sandy, and later he figured that he had done some selectivity in these data, and so we really couldn't untangle it. And as a consequence, we built the Bren Tower and put the reactor up there. Now we're getting the same spectrum pretty much. We're getting neutrons and gamma directly from this little intense source of radiation, and we're making measurements as a function of distance and angle and all the things we did before, but we were also measuring inside Japanese houses and Japanese structures.
Yes.
And we solved the problem. But some of the weapons that we had data on, it turns out, had been boosted weapons. Now, we couldn't talk about it in those days, but these were weapons that were enhanced in neutron yield, and you know about that.
Yes.
And we had some questions about some of the neutron data. So then we designed the world's most intense 14 MeV neutron source.
Way to go.
A DT source. I mean, we're talking about 10 to the 13th neutrons per second from an area. But meantime, other things had happened at the test site, and they didn't want us to put the accelerator on the tower where it was sitting.
Yes.
So the tower was moved over to Jackass Flats from Yucca, and then the accelerator was put on it, and we ran that. And that was to give us information about the difference between the 14 MeV component from boosted weapons and the pure fission component. And that was interesting basic science that is still good.
John, there was, people tell a lot of stories in our time, and tell me if this story was true, but I recall hearing a story about you and Sandy Sigaloff being stuck in the sand in a Jeep out in the boondocks when we were going to do a weapon burst or something like that. Yeah,
well, it's a true story. It was Sandy and Borella and I.
Yeah.
Now, we had recovery teams that go in. As soon as the bomb went off, we're sitting there, and as soon as the telemetry is over, which is typically 4 to 6 minutes, then we could start engines and race down to get our stuff, all the way down to ground zero. Well, on this particular day, Barney Hensley and Rufus Ritchie were to go to ground zero and get it, and I got the first row of collimators. We collected all of our data and came back, except we were never in a hurry to get the gamma, the chemical dosimeters that EG&G folks were putting out. So I got back and I'm through, and Sandy and Borella came along and said, hey, we've got a vehicle problem. Will you drive us to do ours? And I said, sure. I got back in. We're all still suited out, And we went in, we got I drove, and they got the detectors out of the collimators in short order, and we're done. And we're getting ready to come out, and Barney Hensley called. He says, hey, John, when we were down there, it was really, really hot. And we decided we'd wait a little while to get the neutron, the ones from ground zero out to 500 yards.
Yeah.
Will you go get them? We all agreed we go get them. We started driving down. Now, to build a road for a weapons test down there, what you did was you took a bulldozer and backed it up down and dragged its blade, and that was your road. That
was it, yeah.
And if you did it a time or two, you got so you could drive on it okay. But we had a regular two-wheel drive pickup, and so we got it in second gear and going as fast as we can down through there. You do not dawdle when you're in 10 to 20 r/h fields.
That's right.
So. There was just a little bit of a rise, and I went over the rise, and there's sand from the weapons has just totally obliterated any sign of the road. Well, we know it goes straight, and we're too late to stop. Yanked it down a gear and went through, shot through it fine. got down, got the detectors, and Sandy and I and Henry said, guys, do we chance on turning around and getting stuck, or do we take a chance on my being able to back through the same tracks we came through to get out of there? We voted to back out. And boy, I got it down, and we're coming out of there. And I must have missed, it wasn't more than that, the tracks in that sand. And it was just like you had dropped the vehicle into water. With the engine idling, the wheels would turn, the one rear wheel would turn.
Yeah, you bottomed out. Yeah.
We knew there was no point in wasting time trying to get out of there. So I grabbed the radio and told them to send the chopper for us down to the 2,000-yard mark, and we'd walk out. We had all these chemical assemblies here. We had about 60 pounds of stuff. And that's where I really appreciated Henry Barella. I mean, he had a lot of body and not much leg, but boy, he was strong. He still is, I hope. Anyway, we took turns carrying that box out. I didn't send a chopper. The choppers were all busy. So Paul Reinhardt picked us up at 2,000 yards in a sedan. But by then, see, the sun's been up now for 25, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
You always shoot just when the bomb up there is, they can do the EG&G photography. They want just the light just right, and then the sun's going to come up, and you can see to do everything else on the ground. But the sun being up for a little while, and us in all these layers of clothing and masks and stuff, there wasn't a dry thread on us by the time we got out to 2,000 yards. We
I can imagine.
Roughly a mile carrying that thing through sand and wearing all that stuff. But anyway, with all that said, I think we all three got like 900 or maybe 1,100 millirim that day.
That's pretty good.
That we got out of there in a hurry.
That's
right.
pretty good.
And so, but that was, it makes a better story than it felt at the time, because all we wanted to do was to get out of there. But we had a lot of adventures like that. Early recovery, when most of the time there wasn't sand, it was big rocks that roll everywhere, and you had to go around them.
Yep.
And but that's the only time we ever really lost it and got stuck.
Well, John, you and I are getting along in years. So
no, I'm not.
So we hadn't got more than 20 or 30 left, right?
Well, I'm going to have my 100th birthday party this fall just to make sure.
Okay. So where do you think we're going from here?
I worry. We've talked about bomb tests and things where people could get a rim in a day. Mm-hmm. My lifetime dose is up there in a few tins of rim. The parts of the world have radiation doses, as we've seen. Even this meeting, they still admit that the people in Kerala and other places get up to one rim per year. But our bureaucracies are talking about 1 millirem in a way that we talked about 1,000 times more 20, 30 years ago. And I've been assured by some, and asked you about it earlier, it may be that we've bottomed out, that EPA won't continue to push for 4 millirem per year from drinking water that comes out of the earth, Mother Nature-wise. That I'm aware of what the standard means, but I'm just saying that kind of number. I think maybe I'd like to think that someday we will get to a de minimis or not worthy of mentioning dose that is of the order of the root mean square deviation in the natural background or something like that. I get upset when we go, say, to southern Idaho, and up there the natural background maybe, if you count the radon part of it, maybe 500-600 millirem per year. You go to Fort Walton Beach and you know it's 100 millirem per year or something like that. They get 5 times as much, but if you give the people in Fort Walton Beach 5 millirem,
yeah,
it's a concern.
Yeah.
And we're shooting for a risk-free world, which will never happen. And the risk that people take just being alive. After all, we aren't to 100 yet, but if we made that far, and you did a funny kind of averaging, we would have averaged a chance of 10 to the minus 2, 1 in 100 per year, and it finally caught us.
That's right.
Okay. But driving a car to work normally is like 10 to the minus 4th per year. Okay. And people take that for granted. And they do lots of other things that are more hazardous. But if they get 10 to the minus 5th, or EPA wants you to go to 10 to the minus 6 per year, 1 in a million chances per year, it scares people. People are still scared, and we're having litigation, thousands of cases where the doses are less than 1% of the natural background. So that's the kind of thing that worries me. But what you said earlier makes me think, and some of the things I've heard at this meeting, is that perhaps we're bottomed out and that we'll get some more objectivity and some more science into the risk business.
Yes,
I hope.
Yes. Very good. Well, John, it's been a really great privilege to sit here with you for this hour, and I wish you all good luck in the years to come.
And you too.
Me too. Yes, very good.